Hi there, I'm John Ivison, your host, and I'm joined as usual by Marcella Monroe, who is a principal at Macmillan Vantage Policy Group, and Andrew Balfour, who is managing partner at Rubicon Strategies. Right, guys, straight in. We're in day 5 of a federal election campaign. Has anything happened that is likely to make a damn bit of difference come September 20th? Marcella?
I mean, I've been impressed by, I'm just going to say it, I've been impressed by O'Toole this week. I think he's come out, as I sort of said last week, he's not a snarky, old school Stephen Harper conservative. He's not Andrew Scheer. He's been able to, I think, put that fresh face forward. I think that his initial positive ads look really good. I think he's hit the right tone. So that will make a difference. If he can continue to have this kind of rational sounding, conservative pace, he's been able to bring up some of the economic queries that you talked about last week, but in a way that I think doesn't sound scary to Canadians, at least not yet. And so I think it's been a good week for O'Toole. I've been pretty impressed.
So I was hoping to go through the leaders sequentially later, so we can maybe come back to them. But what about the narrative? Is there anything actually happened? Has anything resonated, do you think, beyond the people who are not reading Twitter but are actually on Facebook?
I mean, no one here. I'm in Vancouver this week, seeing my family after 2 years. I would say that is something that we knew would also happen, right? Which no one here is talking about the election.
Right.
Right. Everyone's trying to get some summer holidays in. Everyone's trying to pretend that COVID never happened. And so I would say people aren't tuned in, and they won't likely be till after Labor Day. So in terms of the narrative that you're talking about, no, I don't think there's been some big shift, or I don't think anyone's paying attention.
I don't think there was big shifts, but I think for me the mandatory vaccination thing was a successful wedge. It left O'Toole somewhat apologetic sounding, because he left him offside with the majority opinion. Majority of people think mandatory vaccination is a good thing, except for the people who support the Conservative Party. And so he was kind of offside opinion there. I also thought that
well, now you've got all these companies and organizations basically enforcing it, right? So
right.
The governments who have refused or have paused or are not wanting to do that, companies, we saw Maple Leaf Foods basically saying he's going to enforce it. He doesn't want to be that person, but he's got to for his business. And so you're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah. The other thing I thought that did resonate a little bit was the daycare promise from the Conservatives. They were going to scrap the early learning, the $30 billion, $10 a day daycare plan, and come up with a refundable tax credit. I'm not so sure that's a great idea, because I think people like the idea of $10 a day daycare, and it might actually happen this time. What do you think, Andrew? Is there anything that you think might make an impact?
I mean, I think it's a questionable thing. I think that the GST holiday thing is also questionable. Like, if you run the rough numbers, by not charging GST for the month of December, costs somewhere between $3 and $5 billion to the federal government, which seems like a bit of a foolish idea when you're running the largest deficits in the world. But I think on the daycare thing that it's difficult for all of these things. Like, I think that the success that the Liberals had with the very popular child benefit is like having things being means tested. Like, if you are a wealthy family, you are going to, get this GST holiday, and you're going to go and buy your kid the top end, whatever the new highest end gaming station is. I don't have kids, so I have no idea what that is, but versus someone, and you're going to save a bunch of money, but you don't need to save that money, versus someone who's less well off who is not going to do that. And it's the same thing with the daycare. Like, having a universal daycare thing, it's fine if you have a bunch of money and you want to have a nanny or any of like private things, then you can go and afford it. But the way that the Conservatives have approached this seems to me that they're not thinking about everyone on the spectrum, and it's like the universality of it is a problem.
No, I think that's right. And they're basically just going back to the playbook of thinking that their more important voters are, to your point, are the people who already can afford different options, right? And that's, you know, it sort of harkens back to the boutique tax credit stuff that they love to do. And
Right.
so
I mean,
I don't
Like for
quite
kids playing
understand
hockey.
how that's making the tent bigger is, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
I think that the Conservative childcare policy might have been ill-advised because, you know, it's more or less a fait accompli that all the premiers have signed up for this thing. Eight provinces, 2 territories, and Ontario is just about to sign because of the amount of money that the feds are offering. You could almost have, and you know, it's so far along the road. O'Toole could just have said, quite easily said, right, well, we're going to have to live with that. So I think that was not a great idea, but I do think that the platform was pretty impressive. There was a lot of good stuff in there, not detailed and not costed, but some good ideas. And I think it's worked for them and for the NDP to release it in the first week, which is not a traditional election tactic. What do you think?
I disagree with that. I think that releasing the NDP released their platform before the election even started, and the Conservatives released theirs on day one. So, you know, you need to be able to tease something out. Like, why are you putting it out? Like, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me that you just drop it all right out.
Well, here, let me give you an example. Today in the National Post, we have a story on housing policy because the NDP was talking about housing, and their housing policy is obviously public in their platform, as is the Conservatives. So our reporter quite rightly wrote about the NDP and the Conservatives and not the Liberals, because we don't know what the Liberals are proposing. Similarly,
but no one's paying attention, John.
Similarly, O'Toole has promised, and this is the big promise that I think we'll see play out over the course of the election, to increase the escalator for healthcare spending from 3% to 6%, which is $60 billion over 10 years. I mean, if he's taken away $30 billion from the provinces on daycare, he's given them back double that in healthcare. I can't imagine how the Liberal Party cannot match that or trump it. I mean, it was interesting to me today to read in the Star that the Liberal platform is not finished. I suspect because they looked at the Conservative platform and went, we have to do something on healthcare.
Well, that's quite rightly. I just want to make a quick comment though about platforms. I mean, I think it's very interesting to think about this timing issue, John. I think it's an interesting point to raise. And in the campaigns I've worked on, there's really 2 schools of thought, right? So one school of thought is you put the platform out as early as you can, and then you continually re-announce different pieces of it, right? So you have a substantial platform and then you just start making it thematic where you reintroduce different pieces because no one's going to digest it all at once, and it becomes sort of your literal platform for how you manage the rest of the tour. There's another school of thought, which I think is what the Liberals are doing, which says it's better to wait and see what the narrative of the campaign becomes. You can still make announcements, but you're basically teasing out, if you will, what the campaign's going to be about. And then your platform becomes almost the sort of, you try to make that the second half of the campaign. So in other words, I feel like what the Liberals are doing is they're waiting until after Labor Day. They're kind of seeing the lay of the land. They're figuring out what's resonating with Canadians. To your point, like, is this healthcare thing going to resonate? Do they need to respond to that? What do they say about childcare? And then they'll present us with a plan when more people are paying attention. I think both can work. It matters how much discipline you have. So for instance, for the Conservatives and the NDP, they have to be very disciplined to keep going back to that plan, right? And people like you are going to start to pick it apart. But the Liberals have a little bit of they're also being smart, I feel like, by just saying, we're just going to wait and see, and then we'll get you your plan after Labor Day when people are looking. So both can work, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think that the NDP and the Conservatives thought that there might be a first mover advantage to this. And I think that they are both wrong because as we've discussed a million times, like Marcella said this earlier, like she's out in Vancouver, which is a big, like, you know, a lot of swing ridings, a lot of places where people need to pick up and no one's talking about it. So releasing your platform at the beginning of August, mid-August, whatever we want to call it, I don't see the advantage to that. I think that what the Prime Minister is doing by, you know, waiting and like waiting out, seeing what all the, like, by all of his opponents putting out everything that they want to do, gives them the time to sit there and pick that apart and then throw it out. I don't like, there's no first mover advantage.
I do think that the Conservatives needed to come out the gate with something big because, you know, they're the ones who have to catch up. Just on that Conservative platform, what do we think of the platform cover, Marcella?
I loved it. And here's what I love about it. You know, lots of people were making jokes about it, but here's two things. Like, one, they did what kind of Patrick Brown did, which people have long forgotten, which he released this kind of magazine looking platform. So it's meant to feel like a magazine, like it's meant to be something you might leave on your coffee table.
Well,
and so that's kind of a
the
smart
Patrick
marketing
Brown
tool.
people are doing the Erin O'Toole thing. I wonder if there's a connection there.
Yeah, no, 100%. But I'm just saying, like, in terms of just think about it like a pure advertising thing, like that's just a smart thing. You want something people don't mind having in their house. It doesn't look like a typical party platform. The other thing is, and they did this too with that crazy Willy Wonka ad, like there's a rationale to doing things that are unexpected and maybe seem a bit goofy because it gets us talking about it, right? So if you're trying to get attention away from the Liberals, and we've all talked about how COVID has given incumbents an advantage just because they've been in the news every single day, then these are the kind of things you do. You do things like a sexy dad cover, whatever the hell that is, and you do like a Willy Wonka ad that makes all the progressives go crazy when actually all you're trying to do is get traffic.
I think he's done a good job, Erin, on getting fit, learning French. But if it was me, I would rather have seen him as the serious guy. That's what he should be leaning into, because that's kind of who he is. He's not dancing the bhangra and riding horseback. Anyway, that's just me.
His first ad was pretty serious. I thought the first
ad
was
for sure. So
I mean,
let's
basically
look
basically the platform like cover is like, they should have just called it Dad Bod Weekly.
As somebody with a dad bod, I resent that remark, or more likely, I resemble that remark. Let's look at the leaders in turn then. Let's look at Jagmeet. Marcella, what do you think? How's he done?
I mean, I think he's had a good week. Look, we know he's very personable. He doesn't have any problem connecting with people. He's got a very friendly personality. He did a cute little tweet today about about lifting people up and pushing one of the baggage handlers, helping him get into the cargo plane. That was pretty fun. So, you know, I think he's had a good week. His biggest problem right now, I feel like, is just getting more attention, right? So again, back to my point about what O'Toole's team has done. They've managed to kind of cut through a little bit. Like anyone who's paying attention saw the stuff the Conservatives are doing this week. I had a problem sort of figuring out exactly what the NDP was doing. And it's just because they're not, I don't think, able to connect his personality with the conversation yet. But they might get there.
He might want to stop. He might want to stop wearing suits all the time. Like, honestly, like the visuals, like just chill out a little bit. Like, you know, you don't need to always be in, you know, in his case, like, you know, he can afford better suits than I can, but like, you know, like it's just get a little more casual. Like, I agree.
I think that's a good point too, because it kind of goes to my point, which is that if you're going to have that friendly personality, but you're dressing like you're on Bay Street, it's a bit weird.
And that's the weird thing that I like. Every time I look, I'm like, why are you wearing a suit? Like, no one else is wearing a suit right now, and he's just wearing a suit all the time. Although I'm envious because I haven't worn a suit in 2 years. But like,
you probably wouldn't fit into your suits anymore anyway.
Look who's talking.
I think he's been hitting the right notes. I think when you start talking about clawing back money from the wage subsidy that was used for dividends, when you're talking about expunging cannabis, well, look, good luck trying to get the money back, but telling people it was wasted and misspent is, they will agree with, I think. The housing plan, expunging cannabis convictions, banning unpaid internships. You know, I think that all of these things are good things. They will, if that's the kind of thing you like, then you'll like what he's selling. But I think when the PBO sends back his platform, they're going to be very disappointed because, as usual, the NDP problem is arithmetic. You're just not going to get the revenues from the 1% wealth tax that you need to pay for all of these commitments.
I think that the bigger point that you just mentioned, the PBO, no one knows what the PBO is. They're going to do the costing on this. No one's paying attention.
No, but your opponents are going to point. Your opponents are going to point out that
Yes.
you are promising the earth and money doesn't grow on trees. How are you going to pay for it?
Well, I mean, when you have zero chance of ever running the country, you can go and say whatever you want, I guess. Like,
Well,
I mean, I may as well be running
zero
a
chance. Is
campaign.
it zero chance?
It's a zero chance.
Okay.
Would you like? I will bet you anything you want right now.
No, I'm not betting on an NDP
I will.
government.
I will bet your child.
Okay. No, I'm
Oh
not
my
betting.
goodness, no, don't do that.
I'm
That's
not doing
awful.
that. I might bet. Well, no, would I? No, I wouldn't. Trudeau. What do we think, Marcella? How's he done?
I mean, he hasn't, first of all, don't comment on monetary policy ever. Like, the Prime Minister is not going to direct the Bank of Canada on anything. And I kudos to the journalist who asked the question, but like just following
Well,
on that question, which
It
is
turns
so,
out though that the federal government actually does direct the
Okay.
Bank of Canada.
Do you want to like get into that murky thing? Like, I can dork
they can
out
discuss it, but my
I
point is
can
just
dork
like,
out on this for a long time if you want.
yeah, no, but listen, I'm not saying there's totally disconnection. I'm just saying in the middle of a campaign, why would you comment at any level about
I wouldn't.
monetary policy?
But it
Why
made
would
it-
that even
it
come out of your
made-
mouth?
It made it look like he didn't know what he was talking about.
That's what I'm
And
saying.
he
we're in
probably
violent
didn't.
agreement.
He
It looked
probably-
goofy.
Okay, so two things on this. First, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of our country, is not the dumb person that people
No.
try to make him out to be. He's very like smart guy, and he actually does understand this. He misspoke. Second
That's what I'm
thing,
saying though. Like,
But-
I
but
don't think he's
but
dumb. I
second-
just think it was goofy and
No,
not
no,
necessary.
and you're right. Like, you shouldn't talk about it. Like, I wouldn't talk about it, but I don't see an upside to talking about it. But
Zero.
with that said, like, without getting into the weeds of the whole thing, at the end of the day, these things are not, there's not a lot of direction from PMO on this kind of thing. Like, it's not, it is, if we're going to talk about like arm's length kind of things within the machinery of government, this is one of those things. Like, there's no one in PMO figuring out like interest rates or like
The
fiscal
federal government sets the Bank of Canada inflation target.
Target.
I'm
They
shocked
don't,
that
they
you
don't,
want to
they
talk
don't
about
tell them how to
inflation,
get there.
John.
Anyway, it was obviously a bit of a misstep. I think they obviously had a bit of a misstep on whether they would recognize a Taliban government, and he had to reverse himself on that. I'm always impressed with his fire and energy. I mean, I followed him around New Brunswick in 2013 for a week, and I mean, it was exhausting trying to keep up with him. And he looks like he's still got that, which frankly is amazing given all
Yeah,
these
no,
years.
There's no question about that. For sure, he's a great campaigner. I mean, we've seen that time and time again, and he seems to get energized almost by people underestimating him, which is, good for him as well. I think his opening statement was too long, but he really had a good message, right? Which is that basically we went through this horrible time. We were there for you in lockstep. No one knew this was coming. Now we need Canadians to chime in. And I think it's interesting that in week one, after a couple days, we're not talking about that anymore. Like, going into this, everyone was like, how dare you call an election? No one's talking about that now.
I thought it was interesting that in the Nova Scotia election, I mean, people I talked to on the ground said this was a post-COVID election. People were already looking beyond COVID, and maybe they will in the federal election.
Well, I mean, I don't think that they're, if you look at Nova Scotia, having lived in Nova Scotia for several years, I don't think that there's a correlation between what just happened, where one could argue that the campaign where a conservative party runs to the left of a liberal party was quite interesting. But I don't think there's a lot of that you can pull out of that really, you can't extrapolate into the federal campaign. I would still say that, if you look at regional numbers, the Liberals are way, way, way up on things in Atlantic Canada. I don't think that Nova Scotia is a thing that the federal Liberal Party is going to be worrying about right now.
There are seats there that are going to lose, though.
Where?
Sydney, Victoria. Mark Iking's former riding. You want to take a bet on that one? I'm not betting my child, but I'll bet.
No,
I'll bet a round of golf on it.
Well, I always pay for your golf anyways, so it doesn't really matter.
Anyway, final word on Trudeau before we go down that rabbit hole. I just still have the sneaking suspicion that he's miscalculated by calling an election when people are generally content with the way things are going. And you force people to make a decision they probably don't want to make. And, you know, if you look at David Cameron, for example, he forced people to do that in Brexit. It didn't end well. Anyway, let's move on to Erin O'Toole. We Marcella, you started off and gave your summation, but I think most people would say that he's done better than they expected him to do.
Absolutely.
Andrew, yeah, do you agree with that?
For sure. Aside from running around like Rockcliffe with his shirt off, like things are going well.
And I think it was smart. I've said this to several people because some people were like, oh, he's in the studio too much. Well, he's out and about now, but there is an advantage when you have a new leader, his first time running in a national campaign, to have a very controlled, specific environment that he can come back to as a home base. Because that place is well lit, it's slick, it's easy for him, it's easy for the media, it's accessible, all that kind of good stuff. And you don't have to worry about anything, right? So that's a very smart move.
Except that on like day one, like the images, like he did not do well on images on like that, it was blurry, it didn't look right. Like they fixed it, now it's all fine. But on day one, on Sunday, like those, if an election was run around like photos and images, he's losing because that didn't look good.
Although, as you said, no one's paying attention, Andrew. So
no one
again,
is.
You're getting the kinks out, and that's my point.
Exactly.
You're getting the kinks out.
I thought that he talked about conscience issues for doctors when it comes to medically assisted dying and other things, and the Maria Monsef, the minister, tried to make this into an abortion issue, and it was generally discounted. I think it's going to be very hard to pin that kind of monster image on Erin O'Toole. He's just not that kind of guy, and he's very clear about being pro-choice.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I know it was a bit goofy. On the other hand, it's not like doctors and nurses are forced to be a part of, for example, abortions if they don't want to. So it's kind of cuts both ways. They're both kind of goofy in some way.
Yeah. And as the Conservatives have pointed out, this is the exact same position that many government ministers have taken, Liberal government ministers have taken too.
One last thing though is just a question for everyone. So at what point in time do we think that people start paying attention? Like, so the debates are the week that kids go back to school. Are people going to watch the debates? Does that matter?
I think debate week's going to be very important.
Yeah, I think after Labor Day, people are, for sure, you'll get focus around the debate.
So you got like a 2-week election campaign.
Yep.
That's how Justin Trudeau designed it.
Exactly.
So finally, thank you very much for taking part, guys. We'll be here again next week, and thanks.
Thanks, Sean.